Welcome to today's Explainer. We are tearing away that sanitized textbook version of American history today. We're stepping into a living, breathing world where the greatest expansion of democracy in this nation's history was absolutely not inevitable. It was fraught, it was heavily compromised, and honestly, it hung by an absolute thread. We are diving deep into the gritty reality of the 19th Amendment, exploring the brilliant strategies, the devastating moral compromises, and the century-long legal warfare that followed. Okay, let's dive right in. Picture this. It's a sweltering August afternoon in 1920. We're standing inside the State House in Nashville, Tennessee. And the stakes? They literally could not be higher. Congress has passed the 19th Amendment, but it still needs 36 states to ratify it to become constitutional law. 35 states have said yes. So it all comes down to Tennessee. If it fails right here, the whole movement could collapse. The room is a chaotic battleground of political warfare, and the outcome is just a total mystery to everyone standing in that heat. Section 1. The tie-breaking red rose. Now, if you looked around that room, the bitter partisan divide was entirely visual. Supporters of women's suffrage wore yellow roses, and the fierce opponents, they wore red ones. And the man at the dead center of this storm was Harry T. Byrne. He was a 24-year-old freshman Republican from McMinn County, the youngest member of the legislature. And pinned firmly to his lapel was a red rose. He was fully expected to vote with the anti-suffragists. The House was completely deadlocked at 48-48. A motion to table the amendment, basically to kill it, had just tied. Harry Byrne was the deciding vote. History literally rested on the shoulders of a 24-year-old wearing the symbol of the opposition. But here is where the entire story pivots. Tucked right there in the breast pocket of Harry's jacket was a secret letter. It was from his mother, Phoebe, known as Feb, a college-educated woman who managed the family farm. Among some general updates about the farm, she wrote this exact line: "Don't forget to be a good boy and help Mrs. Cat put the rat in ratification." When his name was called, Harry Byrne shocked the entire room. He voted aye. He broke the tie. The course of American history shifted because a mother wrote a letter to her son. No way, right? Section 2. Closing the constitutional loophole. So, to understand why this nail-biting constitutional amendment was even necessary in 1920, we actually have to flash back 45 years to a pretty devastating legal dead end. Following the Civil War, suffragists argued that the newly passed 14th Amendment, which granted citizenship, already gave women the right to vote. They called this the New Departure Strategy. In 1872, a woman named Virginia Minor tried to register to vote in Missouri and was blocked. She took her case all the way up to the highest court in the land. Then, in 1875, the Supreme Court handed down the Minor v. Haberset decision. Chief Justice Morrison White delivered a unanimous, crushing blow. The court agreed Virginia Minor was a citizen, sure, but explicitly stated that the Constitution does not confer the right of suffrage upon anyone. They ruled that voting was just not a right of national citizenship protected by the Privileges or Immunities Clause. And that single decision forced the movement to pivot entirely away from the courts and kick off a punishing, decades-long legislative battle. So here's the absolute crucial point we need to get right. What did the 19th Amendment actually do when it finally passed? Legal scholars debate two views, the thin versus thick conception. A thick conception would mean the amendment proactively guarantees civic equality and the right to vote for all women. But actually, scratch that, because that's not what the text says at all. The reality of its legal framing is pretty stark. The 19th Amendment is actually quite thin. It didn't magically grant women the right to vote. It simply told the states, hey, if you hold an election, you cannot explicitly use sex as the reason to bar someone from participating. And that is a massive distinction. Because it didn't proactively enfranchise everyone, it left the door wide open for states to use other excuses to deny the vote. Section 3. Strategy, compromise, and racism. Leaving that massive loophole open for state-level suppression, that wasn't just some accident. It was part of a highly calculated political strategy. Let's look at the leadership dynamics and the deep, really uncomfortable moral compromises made just to get those 36 states on board. Carrie Chapman Catt was a brilliant pragmatist. Back in 1916, she unveiled her winning plan, which was this dual state and federal strategy. But to get Southern states to even consider a federal amendment, Catt made a deliberate choice. Reflecting the intense biases of the era, the suffrage movement formed a coalition with politicians who were fully dedicated to maintaining white supremacy in the South. Catt's organization strategically chose not to invest funds in the South, where opposition to black voting was steadfast.
They effectively sacrificed the enfranchisement of Black women to secure the votes of racist politicians.
The brutal reality of the political economy back then was crystal clear. The 19th Amendment passed precisely because Southern politicians knew that this thin constitutional language would let them maintain systemic barriers, things like poll taxes and literacy tests. They were confident they could preserve white supremacy at the ballot box, regardless of what the federal Constitution said about sex. Section 4. An incomplete, fractured victory. Now, August 1920 was a monumental victory for sure, enfranchising 26 million American women. But we need to immediately escalate the stakes here by looking at who was intentionally left behind in this fractured victory. The sheer scale of ongoing suppression is just staggering. Because the amendment only barred discrimination based on sex, states instantly pivoted to citizenship and race. Native American women, and men for that matter, were blocked by state laws in places like Utah all the way up until 1962. That's even after the 1924 Indian Citizenship Act. Asian immigrant women were legally classified as aliens ineligible for citizenship and barred from voting until 1952. And unbelievably, under the 1907 Expatriation Act, U.S.-born American women were actively stripped of their citizenship and therefore their vote simply for marrying a foreign national. Section 5. The century-long suffrage battle. You see, the passage of the 19th Amendment wasn't the end of a war. It was really just the end of a single campaign. For millions of women, state-level voter suppression violently evolved into Jim Crow segregation. For decades after 1920, Black women in the South faced extreme physical peril, poll taxes, and rigged literacy tests just to exercise a constitutional right. It required the relentless, on-the-ground activism of leaders like Fannie Lou Hamer, who literally risked her life, enduring beatings and arrests, to dismantle these deeply entrenched systems leading up to the Voting Rights Act of 1965. Section 6. The fight continues today. Those historical disenfranchisement laws we've been talking about, they didn't just vanish, they morphed. Today, civil rights organizations like the ACLU are fighting modern battles that echo the exact same logic established way back in the 1870s. Let this number sink in for a second. 1.3 million. According to modern research cited by the ACLU, by 2017, over 1.3 million women and girls were impacted by felony disenfranchisement laws. That means they are stripped of their voting rights while incarcerated, on probation, or even post-sentence. These laws were deliberately designed in the aftermath of the Civil War to target Black populations, and today they continue to disproportionately silence women of color from low-income communities. These legal blockades are still incredibly rigid today. Right now, 36 states have strict voter ID laws. For trans women, updating identification cards is a severe administrative and financial burden. In some states, voters are forced to prove they've undergone gender confirmation surgery just to update their ID. It's a medical procedure many cannot afford or simply do not want. This serves as a stark blockade, disenfranchising hundreds of thousands of trans citizens. And it doesn't stop there. Remember how historical exclusion relied on questioning the capacity of voters? Well, today, tens of thousands of disabled voters are routinely blocked by archaic state laws that explicitly deny the right to vote based on assumed mental capacity, laws originally designed to target minorities and women. Add to this the physical and digital inaccessibility of polling systems, and it's pretty clear that systemic neglect continues to bar a massive segment of the population from the ballot box. Which leaves us with a pretty critical realization. We look back at the red rose and the yellow rose in Nashville, we look at Virginia Minor at the Supreme Court, and we look at the voting rights lawsuits happening right now in our own backyards. It forces us to ask, is democracy a destination we successfully reached in 1920, or is it a fragile living struggle that requires our constant vigilant defense? Think about what's in your pocket today and how it might shape the history of tomorrow. Thanks so much for joining me for today's Explainer. Keep learning and keep questioning.